joining us. I'm Anna Kennedy, and I serve as the Executive Director here at Touchstone Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone this evening and introduce Dr. Tom Foley. This is our first webinar with Dr. Foley for a new parenting series that we are just kicking off and getting started. This is all about a parent's guide to raising resilient youth. So our whole goal for this series is to support you in this journey of parenthood. And I want to turn it over to Dr. Foley to say a few words and introduce himself. So thank you everybody for joining us. Dr. Foley.
Okay, thanks, Anna. All right. So again, my name is Tom Foley. Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. It's a pleasure to be asked to come and speak during this series. So we actually have a couple different things that we're hoping to achieve during this series, and there'll be different topics that we're going to cover. But certain themes you're going to hear recurring throughout the series as we move forward. So what we'd like to do is focus the series on being hopeful and providing empowering messages for parents. We're going to talk a lot about family resilience and different ways to adapt and cope to build family resilience over time. Co-regulation is going to be a big topic that we're going to discuss. Co-regulation meaning not only helping the children to regulate, but also we ourselves as caregivers being able to be regulated, and then how to help the kids through that process learn and model what they're seeing. Emotional connection is going to be a big component along with regulation as well. Strengthening relationships within the family system is going to be a big topic. We believe strongly that trying to make sure that connection is a cornerstone for kids and for their support, which is going to tie into family resilience as well. And then lastly, growth mindset and learning through challenge. We'll talk about this, but the idea of building resilience for kids is helping to support children through challenges and struggles. And growth mindset is a great way to kind of think about this concept, and it's a way to not only support the kids, but also how to actually frame in our own minds as caregivers ways to be thinking about challenges, and then helping the kids to think about that a little bit differently. So it's a two-pronged piece. One is for us as caregivers to be thinking about the mindset that we have, and then for us to kind of instill that in the kids. And you may or may not have heard of growth mindset as a concept. It's talked a lot about in education, has been over the years. I don't think it's talked enough about when it comes to just education for families and for caregivers. So that's another big theme that we're going to discuss. Okay. Just as an introduction to myself, so again, my name is Tom Foley. I'm a board certified child adolescent psychiatrist and also general psychiatrist. I did my undergraduate at the University of Colorado, completed medical school at St. George's University in 2010, actually 2005. And then after that was residency at Temple University, and then fellowship in child and adolescent psychiatry at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And I've been practicing in central Pennsylvania for the past 15 years.
Thanks so much, Dr. Foley. It's really an honor, privilege, and my pleasure to welcome you this evening. A little bit more about Touchstone Foundation and my role here and why we're doing this webinar this evening. I'm Anna Kennedy. I'm the Executive Director at Touchstone Foundation. And our work at Touchstone is really focused on youth mental wellness. And we serve all of Lancaster County, and we are a nonprofit organization here in Lancaster County. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary last year, and all of our work sort of focuses on helping families access mental health care in many ways that involves trying to remove the financial barriers or helping families to be able to afford to go to therapy, especially families who have commercial insurance or CHIP or insurance through Penny. therapy can be expensive, and we are trying to help families through some of our programs be able to afford therapy. We also have programs that help older teens and young adults be able to have safe spaces to come together to really explore topics of mental health and wellness, and that is called our Rise Above Youth Summit in the summer and also on Saturdays. So those are some big programs that we run. We also help improve the workforce in the mental health space. So we help students who are interested in pursuing careers in mental health be able to go to school and get the support that they need. So that's just a little bit about us and the work that we do at Touchstone, and maybe some helpful resources that we can share later after today's presentation and in future presentations. If folks are interested, if parents are interested in connecting or learning more, I know Dr. Foley, you've also shared some resources, so we can get into that a little bit later. But thank you so much for being here, Dr. Foley, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Anna. Okay, so a couple things that we're going to try to achieve during tonight's discussion. One is we're going to talk about kind of what I have been seeing in terms of trends for children's mental health needs over the past 5 to 10 years. And then we're going to go through and actually talk about the series and how we have it lined up in terms of topics and what we hope to achieve. I'm going to start off by just saying that, as probably everyone is aware, because it's been discussed quite a bit, and it certainly is in the news over the years, but children's rates of mental health needs, anxiety, depression, have been trending up significantly, and that was the case even before the pandemic. So over the past 5 to 10 years, I remember when I came out of training, I was interviewed from a newspaper somewhere up in Lebanon County, and they were talking about. I remember I was first year out of fellowship, and we were talking about trends of depression in kids was increasing, and here we are 15 years later, and unfortunately, it has not gotten any better. It's only been trending in the negative direction. There isn't one single reason that anxiety and depression are increasing in kids. It's my belief that kids' brains haven't changed dramatically in the past decade, but really it's about the environment that's changed. So we've introduced constant connectivity, social comparison, and high stimulation into developing nervous systems. At the same time, academic and social pressures have increased. And so if we add this to the fact that fewer boredom-based experiences, kids are having less unstructured time, so less time for boredom. And really what you get is a nervous system that feels overwhelmed more easily. And importantly, we're also doing a better job of recognizing and talking about mental health than we were 20 years ago. So the higher numbers don't mean that kids are broken. It means that their human brains are adapting to a faster world. Now, the good news. So the good news with this is that there are predictable and practical ways that families can strengthen resilience within this environment. And this is one of the things that we're hoping to achieve through this series and to help provide you with support and guidance. Okay, so parenting today feeling harder. So I would begin this talk by really saying that something that a lot of parents I think need to hear right now, which is that if parenting feels harder than it used to, it's not because you're doing something wrong. Right, and we'll come back to this, but that I think is one of the questions that good, well-meaning caregivers, parents, are constantly asking themselves. If kids are struggling, why? What could I be doing better? What could I be doing different? Over the past several years, the environment children are growing up in has changed dramatically, and when the environment changes, kids change. So the parenting has to change as well. So the goal of this series is not to add more information or more pressure. It's hopefully to bring clarity, reduce shame, and help you to respond more calmly and intentionally to your child's emotional world. So zooming out before zooming in. So tonight is about zooming out and understanding what's going on and giving you a roadmap to where we're headed together in this series. As mentioned, so some of the themes that you're going to hear us talk about throughout the series will include emotional regulation, growth mindset, structure and routines that promote emotional grounding for both caregivers and for kids. So now we're going to shift into kind of patterns, again, that I've seen over the past 5 to 10 years. I think we'll advance one more slide there. All right. So when parents ask me what I'm seeing most right now, I don't start with diagnoses, right? Because, and the reason for that is the diagnosis doesn't tell us what's at the root cause of any issue. It's also hard to come up with a path forward without really understanding what's going on with a young person. And again, a diagnosis by definition is really just that. It's a definition of a cluster of symptoms, which is to help us in different ways, right? It's to help clinicians be able to discuss, use common language as to what they're seeing in a person who may be struggling with a certain diagnosis. But I think what's more important is starting with patterns, the patterns that we're seeing. And then we can actually help families move forward after we try to understand what those patterns are and what they look like and what might be actually going on. So recurring themes throughout this session are going to be assisting parents with being at their best and understanding that doing the right thing in every moment and every situation is not necessary. So we should not be striving for perfection, right? So us as caregivers, that's, first of all, it's impossible. And second of all, it leads to the potential for feeling guilty or feeling shame that we're not doing what we should be doing. So giving ourselves some grace is going to be key. The name of the game is trying your best, trying to stay positive, and being persistent. Being a support for a young person is a long game, not a sprint. So we'll all make mistakes, and we all do make mistakes. We need to show children that we can learn from those mistakes ourselves and be resilient. Sometimes the most powerful intervention for a child is repairing after we make a mistake as a parent, and modeling is key. Okay, so we're going to talk about a couple different kind of main topics, main themes, as far as things like patterns that I've been seeing in kids' mental health over the years. So what parents are telling me and what I've seen, right, is that many kids are having bigger reactions to smaller things. Boredom feels unbearable. Frustration escalates quickly, and recovery takes longer. So these kids are escalating more quickly than maybe caregivers remember kids experiencing or being able to manage frustration or regulating themselves. And then it seems like it takes even longer for them to bounce back or calm down. So this doesn't mean that kids are fragile. It means that their nervous systems are overwhelmed. I think that's a really important way to kind of conceptualize what's happening. So let's talk about kind of what helps in these situations. So one of the most helpful shifts is helping parents to slow down in the moment. So it's key, and this again is going to tie into emotional regulation, right? So pause before reacting. Emotional regulation is something that has to be learned and taught to children. And it's something that we have to learn if we haven't in the past, right? And some of us by our nature, biologically, are more reactive and more sensitive is probably the best way to think about it than others. So some of us it's more of an uphill climb for those of us that have that tendency. But again, it's important to remember that it's an ongoing process with a huge amount of trial and error, right? And it really begins before a child is born. And then, when we think about a child's development, over time, there are huge numbers of challenges and shifts and, what the challenges that a caregiver is going to have with an 18-month-old compared to a 5-year-old, compared to a 10-year-old, compared to an 18-year-old, it's almost like you're dealing with a different animal, a different beast, a different species, right? It's completely different. So, this is something that you have to kind of learn throughout that process or try to kind of wrestle with. And then, of course, it's even more challenging when you have multiple kids at different stages. So one of the maybe helpful things to think about when it comes to when there's when a child's struggling with an emotional reaction is to kind of frame it as, is my child unsafe or just uncomfortable, right? And staying present instead of fixing immediately. And we'll come back to these concepts. But when parents respond calmly and don't rush to rescue, kids slowly learn. They realize, I can feel this and I can recover, which is huge for building resilience. Another kind of parenting suggestion for this would be practicing like a 10-second pause, right? So before responding to a meltdown or escalation, maybe taking a slow breath, lowering your voice, and then asking yourself again, is this unsafe or is it just uncomfortable? And if it's uncomfortable, the key is to stay calm and stay present. And this works because children actually borrow your regulation before they build it, right? So they're looking to you for that modeling and that scaffolding. And then they're learning through that process to kind of, first of all, that this is normal, so they don't have to panic, right? And that they kind of over time will start to learn to be able to regulate themselves through your support and your guidance, which sometimes is literally just being there and trying to be that kind of sturdy leader. So the core message for parents with respect to this component, this pattern, is resilience grows through experience, not avoidance. We don't want to be constantly putting out or trying to extinguish the big emotions they're experiencing. It's okay to let them sit in it. It's okay to maybe point it out, to validate it with them, and then to be modeling kind of how to handle the situation as they're going through that experience. Okay, so the second pattern is rising anxiety at younger ages. So what parents would report is that anxiety is showing up earlier and in different forms. Not just fear, like what you would think about as anxiety, but also tendencies towards perfectionism, tendencies towards avoidance or reassurance seeking, and the fear of mistakes. Many kids feel that the stakes are high all the time. It's almost like they're hypervigilant, right? They need to be the best. They can't make a mistake. It has to be perfect. It has to be a certain way. So sometimes what we can do as far as helping kids in this situation, or one of the things that I've tried to help parents and caregivers with over time, is helping to shift the parents to respond to the anxiety with empathy instead of alarm, right? So think about it from a biologic perspective just for a second. You've got a kid who's on fire, right? Their limbic system, their emotional part of the brain is lit up. And either because of developmental reasons or just because what I mean by that is they're young, right? So the frontal cortex, the frontal part of the brain, the logical part of the brain is not yet online. Or you just have a deeply feeling kid who, compared to other kids at that age, are much more, again, intense when it comes to those emotions. The parents being able to just kind of sit with them, empathize with them, validate those feelings without reinforcing the fear is extremely powerful. Okay. This helps them to learn after they've settled, right? So they're learning through the experience of this will pass and you've got this. And then after they've settled down, then you're still there with them and you're still there being able to talk about what that experience was like. And this, unfortunately, or fortunately, it's just the way we are as humans. This just has to happen thousands and thousands of times over different ages for the kids to be able to learn these skills. So we want to reduce excessive reassurance as well, right? So they need to learn on their own over time, and excessively reassuring them actually reinforces the anxiety, which sounds counterintuitive, right? So a lot of good parents, a lot of good people, right? That as good parents and good caregivers, they will say that the kid is hurting, they want to stop it, right? And that makes perfect sense on the surface. Because number one, you may be feeling the anxiety and you want that to stop too, right? So there's multiple things going on here. And it really is a dyad, a relational kind of experience that you're having. The problem, and where it's counterintuitive, is that when you quickly put out that fire, they actually are less able to manage the next big emotion. And the most easy example of this that I would see in clinical practice all the time is school avoidance, right? So the kid is anxious. They think that they're scared of school. They're afraid of something that might happen at school. So they wake up in the morning and they say, I don't want to go to school. I'm panicking. I'm scared. I need to stay home. They may escalate to the point where, let's say caregiver one, mom is I got to get out the door. I got to get to work. I don't have time for this. Yeah, stay home, right? And this can easily escalate over time because it's never as simple as I just described, and it's much more nuanced. And what happens over time is the kid is actually learning and it's being reinforced where it will be harder and harder and harder every time they stay home, if it's really anxiety based, for them to get out of that cycle. So the next day, it will be even harder to get to school if it's a truly anxious kid or they're truly worried about a specific situation at school. And not to say that there's not something going on in school that's causing anxiety, because there probably is, right? Or even if not, in their mind it is, and it's a real thing, right? So the question is, how do you deal with it? And you have to be careful not to reinforce the anxiety by allowing them to avoid the stressor. Encouraging small, manageable exposures to the challenge is the key to building resilience, right? So the goal is when you have a kiddo who is so anxious about a specific phobia or a specific fear that they have, you will hear the term exposure therapy, right? The goal is not to create some major stress for them that shuts them down, right? It's about manageable, gradual exposures to those challenges over time so that they build confidence and build that resilience over time. So whether it's actually in treatment, treating a specific phobia, or it's literally helping your 6-year-old get out the door in the morning because they're nervous about getting to school, right? So instead of saying something like, dismissing their emotions, like, you don't need to feel this, we shift the idea towards, I know this is hard and I believe you can handle it. And I'm going to support you. I'm going to help you to handle it. What can we do? Depending on the age of the child, the conversation is obviously going to look a little bit different, but that's the concept, right? You're validating, I know this is hard, and you are empowering them by saying, I believe you can do this. And that's very much like that term, that concept of growth mindset as well, right? It's a challenge that you are helping them to think about it differently and that you've got this, you can do this. And then celebrating the heck out of it when they actually do achieve whatever that issue is, or when they are able to actually overcome the obstacle. So again, another parenting suggestion along these lines, as far as validating the feeling and then supporting small, brave steps. So instead of removing the stressor or offering repeated reassurance, you would say things like, I know this feels hard. And then let's try this first step together, right? So you are teaching, you are modeling, you are encouraging them, and you are supporting them, which again, is absolutely necessary for building resilience in kids. Okay. So this works because confidence grows from doing hard things with support, not from avoiding them. So kind of core concept, core message for this pattern is that confidence grows when kids experience support without being rescued. And then before we shift to the next pattern, Anna was going to jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So we also want to just take a pause here and practice a skill or a technique. So I love that, Tom, Dr. Foley, you mentioned like all the different kinds of co-regulation and how effective it is and building that growth mindset. So for parents with younger children, I know as a parent myself, when I told my 3-year-old to take a deep breath, I know as an adult what it feels like to take a deep breath, but telling a child to take a deep breath is a lot different than actually breathing with them. So we're just going to take a moment now and practice this together. So if you imagine smelling a flower, you can tell your child, smell a flower, take that big deep breath of smelling a flower and then blowing the pinwheel or spinning the pinwheel, making that O shape with our lips to exhale. So that practice of, you can imagine, blowing out a birthday candle and making a wish. I mean, there's so many different variations that you can try with your kids, but to practice it yourself as a parent, for me, I know that a lot of times my tendency is to want to jump in and fix something or to, rescue that moment. So I myself might need to, take that moment and take that deep breath. But that is co-regulation. If I'm stepping back and taking a breath myself, and then with my child saying, let's smell the flower. Let's make a wish and blow out the birthday candle. That's practicing co-regulation with them. So we'll have one more exercise we'll do together later on, but thanks, Tom.
That's great. Thanks, Anna. Um, One thing to think about when it comes to breathing exercises is I would talk to your kids about these too, because they're learning them in schools, right? Whether it's star breathing or whatever, there's different terms, there's different ways that they're conceptualizing it for the kids. But there's a reason that they're doing this, right? And there's a reason that the Navy SEALs use this and the Marines and professional athletes, because it works physiologically, right? It actually works. So certain types of breathing patterns actually slow down the nervous system in the moment, right? And it can be practiced at any time, and nobody has to even know you're doing it, which is amazing, right? So that's why I think that it's so important, and it's a great example of what Anna gave as far as it's just an easy, quick kind of technique to help with the co-regulation. So I would look into that and even be talking with your kids about it. Okay, so pattern three that I've been seeing over time. So parents feeling less confident and more reactive. So parents are feeling as though they're overwhelmed and overloaded, right? I mean, that's the way life is right now for everyone, and I think most caregivers feel this way. Um, as a result, caregivers will say that they feel like they're walking on eggshells. Um, they'll describe that there's fear of missing something, fear of doing too little or too much. Again, that uncertainty and questioning themselves and whether or not they're doing a good job. Um, this often leads to overreacting in moments that don't require an emergency response, right? So again, the caregivers we are all keyed up, and we're busy, and we're racing, and we're running, and we don't always have time for little Johnny, to have a fit, right? And so in that moment, we may overreact, right? And act like it's an emergency response or shut the child down, which may not always be the best thing for the child in that moment. Usually, it's not. If we're overwhelmed, we're probably not doing the right thing. But let's talk about that and how to try to help ourselves in that moment, and therefore help the kids. Um, One thing that is probably not a great idea if we're seeing any difficulties with our kids is to search the internet, just because, right? It's very easy to go down a rabbit hole, which can create a lot of more anxiety or uncertainty for ourselves. So if we're feeling as though something is going on that we're not sure about with our child, it might be best to touch base with like our pediatrician, just to see what they think about what's happening. And the reason I bring that up is just this concept of, again, there's too much information out there. I describe it as a fire hose of information that we are all getting every single day. And it is, part of that is, oh my God, there's something going on with Johnny or Susie, and then Googling it, which is too easy to do. And it can actually create more problems for us. So when we talk about this pattern of parents feeling this way, so what I've tried to do over time is one of the most powerful things that we work on is helping parents with trusting themselves again, right? Helping them to feel grounded and again feeling confident. So learning to tolerate their own discomfort is key, and then responding instead of reacting. So helping caregivers to feel calm and emotionally grounded. Again, whether it's through some type of mindfulness or breathing exercise, like the example that Anna had just given, um, or some other strategy, and practicing different strategies to find what works for you is highly suggested, because we're all very individualistic, right? We all have our own things that work best. And of course, our own support system. So knowing who you can call in a moment when you're feeling overwhelmed, or maybe when you're having a rough week. Um, Creating simple, consistent boundaries for kids. Well, I would say not just for kids, but for the children, but also for each member of the family, and ourselves included, is really important for our own mental health and for us to then be in a place to be able to co-regulate. Um, so the idea of being calm doesn't come from having the perfect answer. It comes from knowing you don't need an answer in every moment, right? So again, there's not always going to be a perfect answer. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to make mistakes. That's okay. Um, Choosing consistency over perfection. is the suggestion, right? So pick one simple boundary or routine and try to stick with it calmly. You don't need the perfect response in every moment. You need a predictable response most of the time. And that's kind of the key, right? So the kids do best with structure and something that's predictable. So if they know that there's a predictable response and we can do that most of the time, that's the long game, right? That's where the money's at. That's what's going to be most successful for and with the kids. So remember, security comes from consistency, not intensity. And the key takeaway from this section is that a regulated parent is one of the strongest protective factors for a child. And that cannot be overemphasized, honestly, right? So one of the best things that kids that I work with have going for them is when they have a consistent, calm, sturdy caregiver most of the time. Not all the time, right? But most of the time is one of the best things that can help a child.
All right. Thanks, Tom. We're going to do one more exercise now. And I love the breathing exercises. There's so many variations, and they really are super helpful for all of us as parents and for kids of all ages. This activity is called butterfly tapping. So you can use the image at the top and sort of hold your hands right at the top of your chest here, right under your clavicle or your neck. Um, and what this does, so you're going to alternate back and forth, tapping each side sort of rhythmically. And this movement, this rhythm consistently is bilateral stimulation. And so what this does is it crosses the midline of the body and it's rhythmic. And so our bodies sometimes need a rhythm to help us reset. And this is going to help to reset the brain. It's going to help our prefrontal cortex come back online when we are in fight, flight, or freeze mode. And so doing this is something that may feel a little strange or awkward. There's many different variations of this. So it could be snapping back and forth. It could be stomping feet in like a marching pattern back and forth. But doing it for 30 seconds or a minute can help the brain and the body come back together and to reset. And so this can be especially effective for maybe your older children who are, in elementary school and beyond. There's many variations and it can be taught in lots of different ways. And again, like Dr. Foley, like you said earlier, this is another technique that is also often taught in schools and can be helpful for us as parents to do as well. So, thanks.
That's great. Thanks, Anna. All right. So pattern number 4, and this is the last pattern. So this last one is basically this mismatch between what kids need and then what's happening in modern life, right? So what's happening is kids today live in a world of constant stimulation, comparison, and speed. And what's missing are opportunities of boredom, effort, frustration, and recovery, right? So again, that if you think about that concept, boredom, effort, frustration, and recovery, that's learning, that's resilience. That's what the kids need to learn to be able to regulate themselves over time. So we need to create settings or environment possibilities for that to happen. So what we've talked about with kids over time about this is, or with caregivers along these lines, is we don't aim for dramatic overhauls, but focus on small, consistent shifts, right? So prioritizing key kind of daily routines that have a major impact on physical and mental health, like prioritizing sleep, physical movement, and then daily routines, healthy routines, creating screen-free moments without shame or power struggles, and allowing kids to work through discomfort rather than removing it. So these changes don't make kids unhappy, they make them more capable. Now, in the moment, especially if you have a kid who is used to being on their screen all the time and you take it away, they will react and they will seem unhappy, right? But what's really interesting is the research coming out, and has been out for a while now, about when you ask teenagers, for example, after the fact, how they feel about and whether they like the fact that there have been like limits placed on the amount of screen time that they have, they notice the difference. Not in the moment, not immediately, but over time, right? So again, it really does work, and it does help them to feel more confident and capable and more regulated over time. So one example or suggestion would be protecting one daily, like what we would call recovery window, right? So a window of time. So every day creating at least 20 to 30 minutes of no screens, no rushing, no performance, just downtime, right? This is what kids need. They need boredom, they need play, they need movement or conversation, right? Or all the above. This works because resilience grows in spaces where effort and recovery are allowed. And the core message here is that resilience grows in environments where, again, they're allowed to have effort and recovery. You need both, right? You need to have that challenge, and then you need to have that downtime as well. Okay? So just being mindful of time, we're at 7:36, and we do want to allow some time for questions and answers. I'm just gonna talk a little bit more quick as far as kind of covering what we're going to be discussing in these series moving forward. So it's important to understand that most of the families that I work with don't need intensity. They need more calm, clarity, and confidence. And that's kind of what the series is going to be about. So now we're going to talk about the roadmap for the series. And again, just kind of discussing the topics in general. So where are we going from here? Each part of this series is going to focus on one piece of this bigger picture. Okay. So the first, after this, the second talk is going to be on the science of hope and resilience. And we'll talk about what hope really is and how it's built, and that hope isn't blind optimism. It's the belief that effort matters. And we'll look at how resilience builds and how parents can support it without pushing or rescuing. And then, Anna, do you want to say something about Dr. Carroll joining us?
Sure. So our next guest is going to be Dr. Ann Kinderwater Carroll, and she is at Penn Medicine, Lancaster General Health, and she is going to be giving a whole presentation and helping us really understand, like you said, Dr. Foley, about how parents and caregivers can build hope and resilience for ourselves and as parents, and also to help instill that sense of resilience in our kids. So that will be next month in March. So thanks.
Sounds good. We're looking forward to that one. And then the third discussion in the series that we're going to have is parenting in the shadow of artificial intelligence and modern technology. And what we're going to touch on there is that technology isn't the villain, but obviously it's powerful, right? And it's here to stay, and we're going to get into all of that. We'll talk about how constant stimulation changes attention, tolerance, and motivation. And we'll also talk about how to set boundaries that are calm, reasonable, and relationship protective. After that, we're going to talk about early support and proactive care. So most kids don't need crisis level intervention. They need earlier, calmer support before things spiral. And we'll talk about when to step in, when to step back, and how to support growth without amplifying fear. And then the last in our series is going to be the future of youth mental wellness. And at that point, we'll kind of zoom out a little bit and we'll talk about what skills kids will need to thrive in an uncertain, fast-changing world. Adaptability, emotional regulation, persistence, meaning, and that these are learnable, right? And that families are going to play a huge role in this moving forward. Okay? So in summary, so the series is not going to be about like perfect parenting, right? It's going to be about calmer parenting, more confident parenting, and more connected parenting. You don't need to do everything. You just need to do a few things consistently, and we're going to take this one step at a time together. Okay? So now we're going to shift over to question and answers, if there are any.
Thank you so much, Dr. Foley. That was awesome. And I know that it's super helpful as a parent, I'll just say for myself, to have the reassurance, like the validation and the, you know, empathy of, you know, we don't have to have it all figured out. We just have to do consistency and sturdy being there. So thank you. If anybody has a question, we can you can put it in the chat or Q&A and we can start the discussion. A few moments to see if anybody has questions. All right. One question is, how do I know when my child's anxiety is normal and or when it's something more serious? So kind of that, you know, I know Dr. Foley, you touched on this. It was pattern 2 or 3 when you were talking about anxiety and avoidance. So what would be some signs of when to talk to your child's pediatrician or family doctor about anxiety?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, I think that to start off with, it's important to remember that all kids are going to be anxious at different times, right? And there's going to be a spectrum of this in terms of what's normal. And one of the main things that you're going to see in younger kids when they're anxious, especially when they can't really understand or communicate what it is that they're feeling, is they're just going to be dysregulated, right? So irritability is what the clinical term that you'll hear. But the reality is they're just dysregulated. They have these tantrums, meltdowns, whatever the case may be. And it doesn't mean that, you know, frequent meltdowns, for example, doesn't necessarily mean, and usually does not mean, for example, that a child has a serious mood disorder or something like that, right? Very often it is a child on this spectrum of, and maybe it's a child who again has a tendency to have big emotions, or they're a deeply feeling kid, and sometimes we see kids that are at a young age where they have that kind of presentation, and they quote outgrow it, right? Because again, what happens, they're able to either understand the emotion, to be able to manage the emotion, and importantly communicate the emotion. And usually in that case where they're able to kind of pull themselves together as they get older is that they've had a support system, right? They've had someone to be able to model and talk about with them what they're experiencing. To answer the question directly, I would say that if you see something happening, if you see a pattern of, again, emotional dysregulation, irritability, school avoidance, if it's persistent, if it continues to happen, if it's getting worse, or if it's getting in the way of day-to-day life, right? So not being able to go to school is a great example, right? Because school is basically a child's job per se, right? And if they can't get to their job, if they can't get to school, if they're not able to, if it's having that kind of level of an impact on their day-to-day functioning, that's a reason I think that you would want to touch base with either their pediatrician or with a licensed mental health professional for an evaluation or an assessment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Foley. We did have a question asking if we could go back to the overview slide again, which was a few slides back. I think that was, yep, that one. So roadmap for the series, I think. Hopefully that's what, yeah, so we breezed through this one pretty quickly. So I think it's just nice to see kind of where we're going. So this is kind of what we've laid out as the roadmap. Each session is going to focus on just one piece that Dr. Foley laid out, kind of some key topics that, and Dr. Foley, these are things that you've seen regularly with families in your practice. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And our goal here is to provide support for everyone as parents, without overwhelming you, without, there's no judgment here. This is this is a safe parenting space for us to build some skills together over time, to have the space to really kind of come together and learn a little bit. Hopefully something that's a key kind of takeaway, something we can do right away. So yeah, we're happy to answer more questions in the chat if something comes up. I think, I'll just ask that one question about what is kind of one major takeaway that you would like parents to, if we could change or try one thing tomorrow, what would that thing be? And I know it's really hard because every family is very different. Everybody's got different things going on. But what would be that key takeaway? And then I see another question in the chat from Shelby. I'll get right to that. Yeah, one key takeaway.
Yeah, so I don't know so one key takeaway I would say is when you think about a child who is struggling with a problematic behavior, again, you name it, right? Whether it's tantrums, being demanding, talking back, you name the behavior. It does not mean that there's something wrong with the child or that you have a bad child, right? Again, I'm kind of in a unique situation where I see kids with, again, big emotions and problematic behaviors, and that's the bread and butter of the families that I work with and have over the years, and that is just a conception that I think is really important for multiple reasons. One is that the vast majority of kids are good kids and mean well, and the trick is to create an environment to help them to succeed. And I think that tied into this concept is this idea that, in my opinion, one of the keys to being a successful caregiver, and what that really means in my mind, is helping kids to be able to grow and be at their best and build resilience and all those good things, is flexibility on the caregiver's part, right? Because kids are all different. And sometimes we, as, again, caregivers, have not only busy lives and our own thing going on, but we have expectations, right? We were raised a certain way, and that's usually our default as far as parenting. And we're human, so before our babies were born, we were thinking about what they might be like, and we form these opinions. And it's very easy, I think, for caregivers to kind of to get lost in all of that, in addition to the day-to-day noise that we have. And when we see a child acting in a certain way, I think that if we are able to remove ourselves from the moment of, it's a bad behavior or there's something wrong with the child, it's more, there's something going on with the child, and what can I do to frame this differently, to try to kind of take a deep breath, maybe just, sit back and try to understand what's happening. That is a very long-winded answer to your question, Anna, but sorry about that.
No, it's totally fine. So we do have a question from Shelby. She asks, do you have an opinion on how much students spend time on screens? I feel there are benefits to writing things on paper in processing and memory. Yeah. I know we're going to talk about AI and technology in a future session, but just if you want to touch on, how much time students are spending on screens, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think it's a loaded question, right? In the sense that, for multiple reasons. I mean, because again, it's just the way that it's the way the education system, it's the way that we are kind of moving as a society. I think that I think that it's a tricky question for multiple reasons, but when thinking about how to answer it, it's also tricky because the content is important of what the kids are doing on the screens, right? So there's a lot of, again, rabbit holes and not great healthy things that that kids can get into online, and then artificial intelligence is its own beast that we're going to touch on later. But one of the real questions, and I think this is a good question for kids, to flip it on the child and say, what could you be doing other than, what are you missing? Thinking about what are you missing out on instead of being on the screen, right? So what are the missed opportunities? I mean, I wouldn't frame it that way for the kiddo, but I would think about it that way and try to help them to appreciate that. Again, it's really hard because now even um, kids are communicating with each other through, through devices. And if you're not doing that, then you're kind of being left out, right? Because that's the
Yeah.
norm now, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different challenging pieces to that. I will say that my understanding is that there's research to suggest that the actual physical act, and if you think about it from just a fundamental human biologic perspective, it's just, and it goes back to Anna's example of the butterfly response. It's like anything that can keep you grounded into the here and now is so healthy emotionally. And I think writing is a good example of that. So actually having, writing on paper as opposed to typing is a small example of, I think that probably, and I think that the research is suggesting this, that it is healthier to have that. Again, I don't know that there's an easy answer to that because, schools are going to do what schools are going to do. But I think it is a question for us as a society to continue to think about as we're moving forward because things are moving so quickly.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, we have another question from Anne. She says, my teen is very open with me, for which I'm thankful. However, I find at times it is difficult to manage their concerns, worries, etc., on top of my own stuff. They are emotionally dumping and feeling better. Advice, what mom does with all of that. So yeah, like being there and being sturdy and receptive to what our kids are dumping on us can be hard to take all of that as parents and then still take care of ourselves. I think that's a really interesting question. And any thoughts on those older kiddos who are just unloading?
Yeah, and again, I think the point's well taken, right? The idea that you have it's a good problem to have. I think that the connection is there, right? And that the child is willing to open up and to talk because I think that is, again, it's very protective for the child. On the flip side, if it is extreme, right? I think it's important from, again, we touched on this in terms of kind of routines and even boundaries for yourself and for the teen, right? So you need your own time. There's certain times when we can talk. There's a limit to how much that can be because again, this also ties a little bit into this concept of if you are almost if you're too available and maybe too reassuring, right? Then they're not necessarily learning the right thing from that experience. And again, a lot of this is nuance and it depends on the situation, depends on the age of the child. But in general, if you have a teen who is just kind of sharing a lot of information, or maybe just is overly sharing and maybe monopolizing a huge amount of time, and you feel like it's actually affecting you emotionally, or in terms of your own time, I think setting that limit for the child is important both for you and for them, right? Because they need to, again, this idea of them learning on their own. And sometimes we are, especially now, a lot of caregivers work from home. And so we're more around, more available than caregivers in the past, which again is a blessing, but it can be a curse in some ways, right? So if the kids don't have enough time on their own to be able to kind of have those experiences and be able to manage situations on their own, that can be a disservice to them. So the healthy balance is really the key. And if you feel like the balance is slipping too much in a certain direction, trying to think about that, be mindful of that, and slowly shifting that over time might be helpful for everyone.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the conversation and the questions. This is super helpful. Um, I want to thank everyone for being here. Do we have, if we can stick around for a few more minutes, if we have any other questions? I don't see any, but these are great, great conversation, great questions. And thank you again, Dr. Tom Foley, for joining us and kicking off this series. We're excited. We'll be every third Wednesday, at least through, I think, May or June. We'll see, how things go. But so this has been great. We will follow up with everyone who registered with a link to the recording, and we'll also share some resources. I mentioned as we started our series this evening that we have lots of resources to share Dr. Foley, you had shared some great resources. We have some more resources as well on our website. So check that out if there's something that you're looking for specifically. But yeah. Oh, and you got something in the chat. One of the participants just said she wants to comment and that Dr. Foley has worked with their child, now a teenager, and them for many years, and had the amazing opportunity of helping their teen who was having big emotions and was in another country very far from home, and it was scary. Had high anxiety and about what they were experiencing. And this parent went to what they learned and to stay regulated and offered calm help and support. So that's just awesome. I love that we're seeing that in action, and it's just great. It's like super helpful. And I think just kudos again to you, Dr. Foley, for doing that in our community for so many parents. And we're just grateful that we can offer this additional resource for parents and caregivers in not only our community, but even broader. So thanks again, everybody. And like I said, we'll follow up with more resources and support. And we hope to see you again next month with Dr. Ann Kinderwater Carroll. I believe it's March 18th, third Wednesday in March, 7 p.m. And thanks again. We'll close it down for the evening. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Thanks again,
Thank
Dr.
you all.
Foley. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.